this is a building block opportunity that we won't miss on.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball. The same is Instagram and facebook.com/redrockbasketball. The NBA draft, the 2017 NBA draft has just concluded with lots of very, very interesting things happening. I'll be giving my immediate reaction, well, immediate in that it started 5 hours ago, but immediate in that the draft has just finished. I'll be going through all 30 teams and talking about all 60 draft choices, giving my thoughts on those guys and maybe some fantasy implications for next season as well. So,
let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. Now, what I am going to do with this show, I am going to go through the teams in alphabetical order, and I will, if assuming I remember to click the buttons when I do it, timestamp it in the description of this episode. So if you want to flick to a team and hear about it, you can definitely do that. And I'd be looking to flick towards the Chicago Bulls section whenever that comes up, and just getting a hint of that early, because you reckon there might be a bit of fireworks coming there. There might be something coming. We'll see. I've got the Jimmy Butler jersey hanging behind me here at half mast. We will talk about that trade. We will talk about everything that went on in the NBA on a very eventful day, and where we only had one really major trade, I guess, go down. That was the Jimmy Butler trade. Lots of picks, lots of things to talk about. And if you are watching along live on Facebook, add in any questions or comments you see fit, and if I get to them, I get to them, and we talk about it. Hopefully this show won't go for too long, but I'm already talking enough shit. Let's get stuck into it. And we will start off with the first team. Again, we're going in alphabetical order here. The first team we'll cover is the Atlanta Hawks. They had 3 selections in this draft. The number 1 selection that we want to talk about is pick 19, and that's John Collins, the power forward center out of Wake Forest. He is a sophomore, but he's only a young sophomore, only 19 years of age, and he's in a really interesting spot here. His stats were through the roof for Wake Forest. He had a PR of over 36 in his season at Wake Forest, and his numbers translate really, really well to fantasy. On a team that just traded away Dwight Howard and may not have Paul Millsap, John Collins could find himself in a situation where he gets decent minutes as a rookie. He is a guy that scored a lot of points. His offense is fantastic. Can he take that out to 3? Maybe not at this point, but a good rebounder, good scorer, super efficient from the field and from the line. Defense is going to be the concern though, but for fantasy, I think that he's got an opportunity to play 20 plus minutes on this team. Maybe, I don't think he gets to 30, but he's going to have a significant role here. And for the guy that's picked 19th, he definitely won't be the 19th best fantasy rookie next season. You'd be wanting to take him a fair bit higher than that. Out of all of the guys on their per 30-minute translations, he comes out as the 9th best player on that list, and that's again taking nothing into consideration with situation or team or anything like that. Good free throw shooter, good field goal percentage, solid blocks. He's going to have to work a lot on his defense, but with a team that could be missing both Howard and Millsap, there are going to be minutes there for Johnny Collins. So there's definitely some fantasy intrigue for him, and there's a real chance that he is a top 6 or top 7 fantasy asset for next season. And if the defense stays up, like or if your defense gets to an average level, he can project to be a really valuable NBA player. So I like what the Hawks did there at pick 19. Pick 41 for the Hawks, the selection they got from Charlotte in that Dwight Howard trade. They selected Tyler Dorsey, the shooting guard out of Oregon. Look, they've got the opportunity to lose a few guards. Tabo Cephalosha and Tim Hardaway are both free agents, so they could both be gone. There's nothing overly enticing about Dorsey's game in a fantasy point of view. Yeah, he can hit some threes, but he's not going to be one of those wings who gets a huge amount of assists or a huge amount of steals or is super efficient from the field or even from the line. So he's an okay pick, but definitely nothing too spectacular there. Pick 60, which was actually a pick that I nailed in my mock draft, amazingly. Alpha Kaba from Megalex. Love this pick. Love this kid. There is a lot to like here. He's another guy that projected extraordinarily well from a fantasy point of view. very good rebounding rate, good steals, decent blocks, good free throw shooter. His efficiency from the field needs a little bit of work, and he's not going to be a volume scorer, but he is a player that in deeper leagues, you definitely want to take him higher than the 60th rookie. No doubt about that. He has got the opportunity, again, with Howard and Plumlee being shit, and Millsap potentially leaving, Muscala potentially leaving, Ilyasova potentially leaving. Carver could easily work himself into being one of the top 30 players out of this draft, and that's not just from a fantasy point of view. So I do like this selection by the Hawks of Alpha Carver there, and you should like it too. And again, if you're in one of these, and I'm in a 30-team league that we're currently drafting at the moment, and actually I had picks 8 and 10 in that draft, packaged those, moved up to pick 4, and picked Dennis Smith with pick 4. After Fultz, Ball, and Fox went as the top 3 picks, I moved up so I could get Smith at pick 4. So if you're one of those leagues that's you're decently sized, 30-team league, Carver should be going before 60 in the rookie draft, in my opinion. A real high upside type of guy, and he can stretch the floor a little bit and hit some threes. So he is definitely a name to watch. I really enjoyed that pick from the Atlanta Hawks. Let's now move on to the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, they traded away pick 27 to acquire D'Angelo Russell. Cool. D'Angelo Russell is going to be awesome for them. Pick 22 was the selection they got from the Washington Wizards for Bojan Bogdanovic during the season. And with that selection, they picked Jarrett Allen, the 6'11 center out of Texas, 19-year-old. He's got a big opportunity here. Yes, Tim Mozgov's there, but Mozgov can't be a 30-minute-a-game player. Shit, I don't think he can even be a 28 or 26-minute-a-game player. Allen's not going to be able to be a 30-minute-a-game guy either. But he is in a situation where he can play some minutes. You develop him and Russell and LeVert and Hollis Jefferson together. Maybe he's a 22-minute-a-game guy, but he is in a very good situation. Part of the problem, though, for Jarrett Allen is his fantasy translations look not ideal. They look poor, to be honest. Poor free throw percentage is a real concern for Jarrett Allen. He's not a huge shot blocker, or he wasn't a huge shot blocker in at Texas. There is not a huge scorer, not a huge rebounder. There is a fair bit of a way to go for him, but I think he can. I think he can be useful. And at pick 22 in this year's draft, I think it's a good spot for Brooklyn, and I think he's probably going to have more value than that in fantasy this season. I don't think he's going to be starting from day one, but he projects as a guy to me that February, March sort of time, we will see him starting and playing 25 minutes a night, especially if he does develop well at the start of the season and plays himself into some decent minutes. So he is an interesting guy. That the translations aren't great, but the situation is pretty positive for Jarrett Allen. Pick 57, I also really enjoyed that for the Nets. They picked Alexander Vezenkov. Not sure if he's going to be coming over, the wing player out of Barcelona, a guy that declared for the draft about 2 years ago, Bulgarian player, who looked like he could sneak into the first round a couple of years ago, withdrew his name and now finds himself barely sneaking into the back end of the second round. But the fantasy translations for him are super impressive. Solid percentages, 3-point shooting, field goal percentage, free throw shooting, okay steals, nice threes, okay rebounds for a wing. Nothing that's ever going to blow you away, but again, like Carver, probably a better option than pick 57 in any sort of rookie draft. Again, we don't know if he's coming across, but if there's an opportunity for someone to play minutes in the future, it's going to be on Brooklyn. And getting a guy like Vezenkov, which I know, I think Kevin Pelton's projections rated him pretty highly. And as do mine, he comes out as a top 20 prospect on a pure fantasy point of view. Again, team independent. There is a fair bit to like about Vezenkov, so I like that situation for him, and I like the Nets selecting him there, whether he comes across this season or not. Let us move on now to the Boston Celtics with the next pick, or the next lot of picks. They had obviously a few selections at that area, or in this draft. Pick 3, Jason Tatum, after trading out of pick 1, Markelle Fultz. Tatum, we know, is a 6'8 small forward out of Duke. I don't think he's going to be a standard league draftable player for this season, because he's going to be in Boston, and there's going to be Jay Crowder, there's going to be Jaylen Brown there. Now, can he play at the 4? Yeah, he can, same as Crowder, but I don't think he's necessarily cut out for that, whereas a guy like Jonathan Isaac is almost definitely a 4. Now, Tatum's a guy that can play there a little bit, but he can be a very good scorer. So I think you should consider him obviously a pretty high up there fantasy type of talent. A guy that if he was playing decent minutes, you would want to draft in standard leagues with one of your last picks. I don't think you want to do that at this point, but he can get some steals, he can hit some threes, he can score a little bit, he shoots the ball well from the free throw line, so he can get some decent three-point percentage perhaps coming as well. And being a guy that might even be able to become an 18, 19-point scorer in the NBA, not in his rookie year, but at some point in his career. So you do like that pick, despite the fact that you will have to wait a couple of years probably for that to come to fruition. The other thing is what if Boston go and get Gordon Hayward? That's another guy playing that sort of position that is going to impact Tatum. But regardless, he might be used as a trade chip in the future. That's the word I'm looking for. And we know that the Celtics did really like him here, and I think that you should too, and have some decent level of confidence in him being able to put up good numbers. The rest of the Celtics picks, pick 37, Semi Ojeleye, they went very old with their other picks, all seniors. Jabari, or actually, is Jabari Bird a senior? I don't think he's quite a senior, but he's not young. At pick, where are we? Pick 37, Semi Ojeleye, a guy that transferred to SMU. Picked his game up over in the last season after transferring across from Duke, I believe it was. He doesn't do anything that's really going to excite us from a fantasy point of view, and everything that I said from a point of view of Tatum about minutes being available on the wing, that obviously applies considerably more to Ojeleye, Tatum, Brown, Crowder, potentially Hayward, all ahead of him in the pecking order. He can hit some threes, he can score at a decent clip. The efficiency might be a problem, and lack of defensive numbers are something that don't look great on his translations. But he's not a bad pick at pick 37. I think he fits exactly what Danny Ainge would want to do. Kadeem Allen was their next selection. He is going to be 25 years old this season. 25 years old. He is a point guard out of Arizona. Nothing about him screams awesome fantasy option, poor field goal percentage, but what he is a guy that can be really good defensively, and he can get you some steals. So that's a situation to watch. But of course, Isaiah Thomas, Terry Rozier, Marcus Smart are all in Boston at the moment. So you would expect Demetrius Jackson, you would expect Kadeem Allen to maybe not even sign this year, spend the year on a two-way contract maybe with Maine. And I wouldn't be having too many thoughts or hopes for him moving forward, given that he will be 25 years of age already, and I don't think his upside projects to becoming a starter at any point in his career. And their pick 56 is Jabari Bird, a guard out of California. Nothing interesting really with him at all as a wing. In fact, I don't even believe that he was in my top 100 prospects that I did projections for, so I don't even have any numbers on him to project. But looking at his college stats, definitely nothing looks super exciting about him from a fantasy point of view as we move forward. Let's move on to the Charlotte Hornets, who had an interesting draft, made a couple of trades. Obviously, that one before the draft where they traded for Dwight Howard and received pick 31, and then they traded out of pick 31 so they could get pick 40 and get some cash, which to me is just a dumb move. I know that these owners want cash, but the fact that you were able to swindle a 10-spot higher draft pick out of Atlanta and then give it up to go back 9 spots and get cash is a really weird maneuver to me, and it's obviously cash saving. That's all it's to do with, cash saving. But to go on a more positive note for Charlotte, at pick 11, Malik Monk fell to them, which is absolutely sensational for them. Can't believe that he fell down to pick 11. He's a 6'4" shooting guard out of Kentucky. Some people think that maybe he can handle the ball a little bit. I'm not convinced that he can ever become a full-time point guard, but we've seen guys like Devin Booker and the Blue Arrow, Jamal Murray, come out of Kentucky and play there strictly as a 2, who then show that they can have a fair degree of ball handling ability once they head to the NBA. So maybe Monk can be that guy. He is undersized, but he's pretty athletic, very, very good shooter. And that's exactly what this team needs, especially after Marco Bellinelli's gone. They don't have three-point shooting players on this team. So he's going to find himself in minutes almost immediately. I don't think he is... Well, shit, he could start. There's a real chance he starts, especially if they're going to start Howard in trying to run a Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Dwight Howard, Marvin Williams front court would not be ideal. So maybe you move Batum to the 3, put MKG on the bench and start Monk. That is definitely a possibility. Overall, his fantasy translations I wouldn't say that they're sensational. The low rebound totals are an issue. The low assist numbers. I would consider him more like a Jamal Crawfordy type of fantasy player who hits the threes, can score, obviously, hit high free throws, but the overall field goal percentage, the lack of defensive numbers, and the lack of assists and rebounds is somewhat of a concern for his fantasy point of view. So despite the fact that he slipped to number 11 in the actual draft, if he was around at like 8 or 7 or so in a fantasy rookie draft, I wouldn't necessarily be jumping on him there. His numbers don't project sensationally. With pick 40 that Charlotte traded with New Orleans, I like the pick that they made. They selected Dwayne Bacon with that pick, and you've heard me go on about it plenty of times about just getting wings is such an important thing, and that's why I think a lot of teams made mistakes in the back end of the first round by going with some of these big guys when the wings, to me, are the more important players that you want to go for. Bacon did fairly well in his time at FSU. He was a high usage sort of guy. He needs to transition out of that role. Fantasy-wise, he doesn't translate to having a great sort of initial start to his career, and he's probably at best an 8th man in the NBA in his career. He has to bring something else. He has to bring maybe an increased steal rate. Maybe he's got to get more efficient and hit more threes. But to me, he's just the body can be useful, and he can be an interesting guy to have out there on the wing and help guard wings that other teams have. But fantasy wise, I'm definitely not getting overly excited about Dwayne Bacon on the Charlotte Hornets, but Hornets fans should be pretty pumped for the monk drafting. All right, here we go. The Chicago Bulls. I might have a drink before we start because this could be a while. So, the Chicago Bulls traded Jimmy Butler for pick number 7 in the draft. Okay. For Zach LaVine, a no-defense athletic guard who has been a very good shooter, but I still have doubts about him, who is coming off an ACL injury, and Chris Dunn, a 23-year-old second-year point guard who, if he was drafted in this draft, would have been the 6th point guard off the board. Remember that. He would have been the 6th point guard off the board in this draft. I am 100% sure of that. Maybe would have fallen out of the lottery. They got Chris Dunn, they got Zach LaVine, they got pick 7. Oh, and wait, they also had to throw in their pick number 16. So not only did the Bulls have to give up Jimmy Butler, they also had to give up pick 16, which is absolutely mind-bogglingly horrible. Just horrific. Now, Jimmy Butler is going to have his value heading over to Minnesota. They've got their own issues, though. Their three-point shooting is going to be disastrous. Butler's had some okay three-point shooting numbers, but he's not a good shooter. And Wiggins is not a good shooter, and Gorgie Jang is not a good shooter, and Ricky Rubio is not a good three-point shooter, and Karl-Anthony Towns is not a good three-point shooter. They don't have any shooters, but Butler's minutes will probably go up. His stats will be fine, and he's going to be a solid middle, early second-round player next season. The thing is, Chicago, Gar Forman, John Paxson, Jerry Reinsdorf, Michael Reinsdorf, he had 2 years left on his contract. What the hell was the rush to trade him away? What is the problem with this absolute turd of an organization that you have to make a deal that's as horrible as this? Surely there is more out there. Chris Dunn is bad. And I did get into some arguments with people telling me, you can't tell me he's bad. He's only been in the NBA for 1 year. He's bad. I was not high on him heading into the draft last year. That was vindicated in numerous ways. He was horrible last season. He provides good defense, sure. Just add him to the list of Bulls point guards who can't shoot or can't do anything offensively. Michael Carter-Williams, Rajon Rondo. Who knows if Rondo will even be back. You wasted assets to get Cameron Payne last year, who I really like. But he was poor as well. Which one is it? What are you going to do? What are you going to do with Rondo? Are you going to cut him? Are you going to keep him? Yet they haven't made a decision apparently at this point. Who starts on the wing now for this team? Dwayne Wade, man, he's going to opt in to his deal. There was a little bit of doubt, but he's going to opt in. So this team is going to be as unwatchable. And sometimes young tanking teams can be fun. This is unwatchable. With Dunn running things, Jesus. Wade, whoever starts at the 3, Denzel Valentine, and then Chicago. Oh, there's more to come. With pick 7, you've got the opportunity to take who I think is the 3rd best player in this draft. I know you just traded for Chris Dunn, but it was a mistake. All right. Dennis Smith is there. Malik Monk is there. Frank Ntilikina is there, although he's not the best fit. These guys are there. And you pick Larry Markkinen. I know Markkinen's a very good shooter. I know that. But at pick 7, he's not the 7th best player in this draft. It's not the right pick. It's a horrific pick. And of course the Bulls would stuff it up. Of course they would make that decision to make a bad pick in this spot. They also have come out and said that they are intending to re-sign Nikola Mirotic in restricted free agency, which I believe that is what they should have done. But then adding him to Portis, to Markkinen, do they want to play Markkinen at center? Like, Jesus, that's terrible. What are they going to do with Markkinen? Now, he could really thrive in a Fred Hoiberg system. His shooting could work out. That there's no doubt that is a possibility. But the defensive stuff from him is a real concern, like a real big concern. From a fantasy point of view, we're talking about Enes Kanter level lack of steals and blocks, and doesn't come with Enes Kanter's rebounding ability. Now, he can hit some threes and he can do that relatively efficiently, but I don't think he's coming in and being a 42% three-point shooter as a rookie. Rookies just don't do that. It might take him a while to get to that level. There's nothing against Markkinen. He's probably a good kid. He's probably going to be a good player, but this is just a horrendous outcome. If Jonathan Isaac had a slip to that spot, it would have been more palatable. You guys know how much I don't think Dunn is a good player. And to get him back and to get Levine, who's the best player, who's coming off an ACL injury, and we don't actually know how that's going to... Look, remember the last time the Bulls had an athletic guard that came off an ACL injury? Derrick Rose worked out pretty well after that, didn't he? Just awesome stuff from him. Let's see how Levine goes. Levine can do some things, but he is not your star that you want to build around. He's a 3rd option, a 4th option on a good team, maybe. Markkinen the same. These aren't stud players. Jimmy Butler, you've heard me talk about Butler before. I'm not totally sold on Butler. I think he's got a bit of the shit blokes about him. I think there's definite issues there, and there's definite locker room considerations for the Bulls. And a lot of that was brought on by Butler. Definite shit bloke concern. We'll see how that goes in Minnesota. Maybe he'll be fine. But I think there's definitely that concern with him. But this is just as bafflingly... So the trade is bad. The draft choice is bad. And then you're sitting there, Bulls, at pick 36. And Jordan Bell, who's one of the best defenders in this class, a guy that probably should have gone in the early 20s, he is sitting in your lap to get someone to be a defensive impact player, to come in there and perhaps pair with Markkinen and go, you know what, maybe these guys can be our front court of the future. Bell can go and do all the defensive stuff. Let Markkinen get out there and shoot and work these guys together. But no, the fucking tight asses, Reinsdorfs, Foreman and Paxsons, they sell it to the Golden State Warriors. And when the Warriors come to you and say, we want to give you the most money that we are absolutely allowed to give you because we want this guy, surely alarm bells ring. They did it last year with Pat McCaw and said to the Bucks, we want to give you money. Can you give us this guy? If the Warriors do that, if they come to you and say, we want this guy so badly, we will give you as much money as we are allowed to, your alarm bell should go, you know what? This guy's actually good. But no, the absolute dickheads in this organization say, okay, you know what? We fucked up everything else. So why don't we do this as well? And we'll send Jordan Bell over to the Golden State Warriors, where he could just immediately come in and take over from James McAdoo, maybe David West, and be a guy that can get on the court and actually impact playoff games in a minimal role in a defensive situation. Whereas you could have paired him with Markkinen, you could have paired him with Mirotic, let him play behind Lopez, whatever it is, develop this guy. But no, you trade that pick away as well. Absolute ridicularity. Just mind-bogglingly bad. This is the worst front office in the NBA. It is not close. The Kings, they did all right. We'll wait till they stuff something else up. But now they did all right. My jury is still out on what Magic Johnson's going to do for the Lakers. Hated that Russell trade, but what he did today was fine. Orlando, a lot of question marks there, even with the new front office, some curious decisions. But this is the worst front office. This is the worst run team in the NBA. It's without doubt. No one is held accountable, and not all the blame goes to Foreman and Paxson. A lot of it goes to Reinsdorf, because they'd be saying, give us the money. Be as mediocre as you possibly... And now they're committing to a rebuild. How long is that going to go? Until the Reinsdorfs go, can you just get us back into the playoffs because we want some cash? I don't care if we finish with the 8th seed. It is just ridiculous. Oh, actually, sorry, I forgot. Worst front office in the NBA, the Knicks. But the Bulls, man, it's neck and neck. They are right there. So that was, and as for Markkinen, He's not going to be a standard league draftable player next season. Again, it's assuming the Bulls bring back Mirotic. But even if they didn't and Markkanen was in there playing 30 a night, I just don't think that he can even sniff the top 120. So I don't like the pick. I don't like it from a fantasy point of view. And yeah, that's I can't stomach speaking about the Chicago Bulls any further. The Cleveland Cavaliers did nothing, so we'll skip over them. Let's move on to the Dallas Mavericks. And this is where shit got very, very interesting. I did enjoy this situation for the Mavericks quite a bit. They had pick 9 and Dennis Smith Jr. fell into their laps. I have been on record as saying that Smith to me is the third best player in this draft, and I would have taken him at 3 or 4, definitely at 4 to the Suns. He fell all the way to at 9. I would have taken him over De'Aaron Fox. I would have taken him for the Magic. Shit, the Bulls should have taken him at pick 7. He was there. I know they just got Chris Dunn. The Knicks with Ntilikina, I can understand why they went there, but Smith I still think is the better prospect. Rick Carlisle is a notorious rookie hater, so we do have to have that handbrake on it. But almost immediately after the pick, Carlisle came out and said that we think Dennis Smith can be an instant impact play. His competition for that point guard role is Yogi Ferrell, who, let me remind you, is not good. He had a decent run last season. The Mavericks do not believe in him as a starting point guard. I can 100% assure you of that. The Mavericks have also said that they're not looking to go after a point guard in free agency. They've got JJ Barea, they've got Seth Curry, but Dennis Smith is going to be the man. Even if it's not from opening night, he will be the starter at some point this season, and he is going to be very good and make a lot of teams look stupid. Now, from a fantasy point of view, how does Smith look? Well, I think his projections for his rookie season can be solid. The percentages are going to be an issue, but I would have no problem with taking him with one of your later picks in a draft. The assist numbers should be good steal numbers. Hopefully get some threes and get some scoring. And as I told you earlier, I picked him at pick 4 in a dynasty rookie draft, and I would have probably gone with him at pick 3 if I had been able to get, or if I had have had pick 3, that's the direction I would have gone. I really do like what he can do. He falls into a great situation, running pick and rolls with Dirk, with Nerlens and Noel, with the pencil there as well. He has got a massive opportunity to be the rookie of the year next season and develop himself into a very, very top line point guard. So I love that for Dallas. Dennis Smith getting there. Fontes Bura says, I still remember the time that Dunn was going to steal Rubio's job. Or remember also when the GMs said that Chris Dunn was going to be rookie of the year. That worked out well for them. Muhammad Nar says, is Tyus now the backup point guard in Minnesota? Yeah. Until they get someone. And Tyus Jones is good. Until they get shit. I would have preferred Tyus Jones coming back over Chris Dunn in that trade. Not to go back to that too much, but I would have preferred Tyus Jones. Yeah, at this point, he is the backup point guard. The other thing is that again, I don't want to divert too much. The Bulls, Gar Forman came out and said, we managed to get some young players and some lottery picks in exchange for Butler. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Don't make it out like you got both things. Your young players were the lottery picks. Like you got one lottery pick, you got Markkanen, and you can't come back and then say you call Levine a lottery pick and call Dunn a lottery pick and then also reference them as your young guys. You're just double dipping. You also got one of the worst rookie point guards we've seen in modern history in Chris Dunn. But anyway, that's enough. Back to Dallas. Love what Dallas did. Love Dennis Smith in that position. All right, where are we going to go to next? Who's the next team? Let's go to the Denver Nuggets, who made a draft day trade. Yes, they traded out of pick 13, and they got back Trey Lyles in pick 24. So Trey Lyles is done in Utah. He was horrendous in his second season. Yeah, promising in his first year, but absolutely horrific offensively and defensively in his second season in Utah. Denver, with pick 24, they then selected Tyler Lydon out of Syracuse, the 6'10", 21-year-old, a 39% three-point shooter. Defense is going to be a concern, like Trey Lyles. Coming out of a zone system in Syracuse, that's always the concern. But what Lydon is able, we'll get to Lyles in a sec, but what Lydon is able to do is he did put up good defensive numbers. So he got those blocks, he got the steals. He can protect the rim a little bit. So he could be an interesting guy next to Jokic. The problem is you're going to have Lyles there. You're going to have Juancho Hernan-Gomez there. You're going to have Lydon there. You've currently got Wilson Chandler there. Do you bring back the Rooster, Danilo Gallinari? Like, these are a lot of guys to play that position. Now, the Rooster's probably more of a 3, although his best position is the 4 at this point. Maybe they want Juancho to develop into a 3. I just thought it was a weird pick to pick Lydon there at that spot. His fantasy upside's pretty decent. He's got 111 upside no worries. The field goal percentage, I think he can be solid in that and his free throw percentage. And he's a pretty good rebounder for his size. I'm just not sure he can ever crack a big enough role to have that. As for Trey Lyles, I don't know what to make of Trey Lyles. Is he the guy we saw in his first year, or is he the shit show that we saw in his second year? Not writing him off at all. He's still young, and I still think that he can develop into something, but the front court situation is quite crowded with guys that are similar, and I still think that Juancho is the best prospect out of him, Lyles, and Tyler Lydon. Now, Juancho is still my guy out of that group, so I wouldn't be rushing to acquire Lyles based on this trade, thinking this is opening up huge amounts for him. I know that they do like him there, and they do think that they can rehabilitate him, and he's playing with a Kentucky guy again, with the Blue Arrow and next to Nikola Jokic. But I'm not totally sold in Trey Lyles bouncing back or being a starter next season and being an interesting player. But there's obviously a lot of water to go under the bridge with that section. Denver had quite a few other draft picks as well that we need to talk about. At pick 49, they had Vlatko Kančar, the wing out of Mega, or not called Megalex, I'm sorry, the power forward out of Mega BMAX, not called Megalex anymore. He's 6'8" with a 6'11" wingspan, 20 years of age. I don't think that he is necessarily going to come over, but at this point, I just don't doubt anything the Nuggets do with their international scouting. It's been absolutely superb. Much like Lydon, Kančar can be a 1-1 player. He can be a guy that can handle the ball a little bit as a big man as well, get some rebounds, and be a decent enough shooter. And I think that for a guy that was picked, where was he picked? 53? 49? I think that in a dynasty draft, you pick him higher than that. I think his upside is much, much greater than that again, but he moves into that situation where there are just so many guys there. But we're talking a couple years down the track, and these players are going to move on. Numerous of them are going to move. But I like that pick for Kančar there. The other pick that Denver made, pick 51, Monty Morris out of Iowa State. The Bulls must be absolutely spewing that they weren't able to draft someone from Iowa State. He's a 6'3" point guard. He's 23 years old, but he had an absolutely sensational assist-to-turnover ratio, and I love this pick for them. Emmanuel Mudiay has been whispered in trade talk, so maybe he moves on somewhere. Jameer Nelson's not going to hold on forever, and the Blue Arrow is currently their starting point guard. So Morris could find himself in a top 250 role in fantasy within the next couple of seasons. The turnovers aren't going to be a problem. He can create stuff pretty nicely as a point guard, so he is an interesting player, good assist, decent rebounder for his size as well. I really like this selection of Monty Morris here for Denver. He also projects decently well for fantasy with those assists and steal numbers, high free throws, and decent amount of three-pointers. So he's a guy that you should be pretty interested in after the Nuggets picked him at that selection. Let's move on to the Detroit Pistons, who had pick 12. And yeah, this isn't the way that I would have gone for Detroit, but they selected Luke Kennard, the shooting guard out of Duke. He's 6'6" as a shooting guard, 21 years of age, and shot the ball brilliantly during last season. Defensive concerns are a problem, but look, the Pistons do need shooting. We're well aware of that. Reggie Jackson, Ish Smith, subpar shooters. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope takes a lot of shots, doesn't necessarily hit them. Marcus Morris, Stanley Johnson, Tobias Harris, like none of these guys are good shooters at all. So adding a guy like Kennard, who probably is never going to be able to be a 30-plus minute a game guy, maybe he's like a 27, 28 minute a game starter at some point, but they think he can handle the ball a little bit. Defense is going to be the concern, but if you've got these other guys that can't shoot, then hopefully they can help there, and Kennard can hit some threes and help them space the floor. So it's not a total write-off. I don't really love his fantasy prospects. The percentages could be nice, and he's going to be one of those guys, I think in a couple of years' time where, as I continue to say, you just stream him off the bench for threes or off the waiver wire. Maybe he could have seasons where he hits 2 threes a game. That is totally plausible. In fact, it's probably likely. And do it with like 10 points a game and very few other stats. But he's got a big enough body that maybe he can grab some assists. Maybe he can get some steals. So that is a little bit risky. He's not going to provide much on the defensive end. Pick 38. The Golden State Warriors purchased Jordan Bell from the Chicago Bulls, as I mentioned earlier in my rant. This is a sensational pick. You know, when I had Sam Vecini on last week, we talked about Jordan Bell, and he was all over him, talking about he could be the best defensive player in this draft potentially. He finds himself in a great spot. I've talked about the Warriors the other day that Zaza, West, McAdoo, all these guys are unrestricted free agents. Kevon Looney, Damian Jones haven't showed much. So Jordy Bell has got a real opportunity here, and he projects as a top 5 fantasy player if everyone was in the same situation and getting the same minutes. His ability to get rebounds, steals, blocks with a high field goal percentage is super useful. And if he had top 150 seasons in fantasy, I would not be surprised. Now, obviously, in a Warriors situation, we're a fair distance away from that. But if the league continues to trend smaller, I could see him playing in lineups alongside Draymond Green and having those guys be absolute terrors defensively, guarding the perimeter, guarding the rim, and being a decent option to bring up those defensive stats of steals and blocks and rebounds. And this is a sensational pick from the Warriors, and you should be looking at him at higher than pick 38 in Dynasty rookie drafts, because he has an opportunity, like Pat McCaw, to be a impact rotational player immediately. I don't think that he's going to be Damian Jones or Looney, their last 2 first-round picks who haven't done jack shit in 2 years. He's going to be more McCaw than those guys, someone who can come in and be an impact guy and one of the top fantasy per minute type producers that this draft had to offer. And the fact that the Warriors were able to get him off my Bulls is just infuriating. It is, and I don't even want to say my Bulls anymore, because doing this job, your team allegiances do fade and they do disappear. And when a team continually pisses in your mouth like the Chicago Bulls do, you're just done. And I'm pretty much done. If the Bulls came out and won a title, cool, no worries. But if they came out and won a title, I wouldn't be cheering. I wouldn't be doing anything. I'd be going, that's nice, because I'm done. I'm done with them. I can't deal with this bullshit anymore. It's just continual frustration that this team offers. Anyway, enough out of that. Let's move on to the Houston Rockets, who I think had a pretty successful draft, considering they just had the 2 picks in the second round. Pick 43 is a bloke that came out as my number 1 fantasy translated rookie, and that's Isaiah Hartenstein, the power forward out of Germany. His efficiency is a problem. His shooting is a concern, but rebounding ability, defensive stuff, steals and blocks, really, really good stuff. Hits some threes. He's a guy that could be a 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks sort of guy. Ryan Anderson, maybe he's not around for long. Maybe Sammy Decker doesn't take the leap. Nene might not be around. Hartenstein's a guy to watch, and like a few of these players, someone that I would take a little bit earlier than his draft spot at 43. He does have that ability. In fact, I wouldn't have any issue in taking him in the mid-20s in a fantasy rookie draft. A good situation for him, a guy that I really do like, and I think this is an excellent spot for Isaiah Hartenstein to land. At pick 45, the Rockets selected Dylan Brooks, the small forward out of Oregon. Don't have as much excitement for Brooks, but he translates very well as well. Decent assist numbers for a wing. Not bad percentages, steals, threes, pretty good scoring. And this Rockets team, they do need some wings. Behind Trevor Ariza at the 3, they were playing Eric Gordon at the 3. Like, they don't have much there. Now, that's not to say that he's going to force his way into the rotation immediately, because we know that D'Antoni runs a very tight rotation and a very small rotation. But the guys there, like Kyle Wiltshire and Bobby Brown and Troy Williams, like, to me, Brooks can easily get himself ahead of those guys, and in a couple of years' time, work himself into being a 7th man, a guy that can score and help a little bit in that bench unit and have some degree of fantasy usefulness. So I do like that pick there for the Houston Rockets, and I especially like their Isaiah Hartenstein pick. Not as sold on what the Indiana Pacers did. They had pick 18 and they selected TJ Leaf. Of course, any opportunity that you get as the Pacers to select an American white guy, you got to take it. 6'10", out of UCLA, power forward. He was a freshman. He shot 47% from 3. Now, a lot of that was helped by Lonzo Ball, but you could also argue that having TJ Leaf helped Lonzo Ball. It was a symbiotic relationship. How does Leaf look from a fantasy point of view? I think he looks okay. Like, he's not going to be a great defender, but he's not horrendous. He does have a bit of size and a bit of strength. He can rebound the ball okay. I don't think he's going to be a guy that comes in immediately and hits over a 3 a game or hits him at 47%, that's for sure. But I think he can be a solid efficiency type of guy who can get a little bit of the blocks, and the rebounds will be okay. And it's not a bad pick. It's not the direction that I would have gone. But with their big man stocks not awesome outside of Miles Turner, and I could see Turner and Leaf playing together. Like Thad Young's there, he's getting older. Lavoy Allen, Kevin Seraphin, Al Jefferson, like these guys are nothing to be excited about. It's a totally fine pick. At pick 47, they have grabbed a guy that slid quite a bit, and that's Ike Anabogu, the center out of UCLA. He didn't play a huge amount as a freshman at UCLA. He's a guy that you look at to be a shot blocker, rim protector type of player, and he's in a great situation to come in as the third center here behind Jefferson and have a real chance to perhaps overtake him at the end of his first year. Good rebounder, but he's not going to do anything else. Can't stretch the floor, not going to be an offensive threat. Rebounds, blocks, and maybe high field goal percentage with poor free throw percentage. So while it is a good pick at pick 47, I don't love it from a fantasy point of view, but definitely I'd be okay with grabbing him a little bit earlier just because of the potential. At pick 52, the Indiana Pacers, now they got this as part of a trade from the Pelicans. The Pelicans traded Tim Frazier, which I didn't mention the other day, to the Wizards to get pick 52, which I thought was just a ridiculous trade at the time, just mind-bogglingly stupid, like ludicrous stuff for them. And then they traded that pick 52 to the Pacers for cash. So in essence, they traded Tim Frazier away for cash. They used that cash, though, to trade up with the Hornets and get pick 31. So I guess it's not totally a disaster for the Pelicans. But at pick 52, the Pacers selected Edmund Sumner, the point guard out of Xavier. Now, he's coming off a torn ACL, a junior, big point guard who had a little bit of a growth spurt relatively late. The assist numbers, the steal numbers are pretty good. He's got a fair way to go. The knee problems are a concern. He can be a little bit loose when he's out on the court, but the Pacers point guard situation, who knows what the hell's going on? Will Jeff Teague be back? I'm not convinced. The Pacers, I think it was Pritchard that put out, we'd like him to come back. We think we'll give a decent offer. That's not encouraging that they're going to bring him back. So there is an opportunity there at some point if Sumner can recover, to show that maybe he's the guy that they can at least rely upon as a backup, because they got no one. Aaron Brooks, Mighty Joe Young, like there's nothing exciting there. You shouldn't be getting overly excited for Sumner at that pick either. Now the next one I'm a little bit torn on because it's the Los Angeles Clippers, and that is the place where draft picks go to die. The problem is they got two blokes who I really, really like, and they got them by buying picks. Now normally buying picks, it works out real well for the team buying the picks. McCaw is the example that I gave you there. A couple of years ago, it was Jordan Clarkson with the Lakers buying that pick. Generally, you buy a pick and it works out pretty well. The Clippers bought these picks, one from the Sixers and one from the Bucks. Pick 39, they selected Jawan Evans, the point guard out of Oklahoma State, the small guy, but Chris Paul, even if he does remain, he's not going to be around forever. And Evans gives them an option that's not Ray Felton, that's not Austin Rivers' backup point guard. Now, it's Doc Rivers, so he is not going to see the court at all. He'll play 20 minutes for the season, maybe. But he is an interesting name that when Doc says, you know what, I'm done with this team, which will probably happen pretty soon, Evans is a guy to really, really watch. So I like him as a guy to take a little bit earlier despite some pain you'll get early on. At pick 48, the selection they bought off the Bucks, Sindarius Thornwell. I love this pick. Love it. With JJ Redick, Jamal Crawford potentially, or Redick potentially not going to be there. Crawford aging and shithouse at this point. Thornwell's a guy that projects absolutely fantastically for fantasy. Top 5 translation type of guy. The steal numbers, the scoring, the rebounds, decent assists, good threes. He does have to work on efficiency and become a better shooter, but this is another situation that I would love at basically any other team that wasn't the Clippers. These guys just will barely play, and they'll get buried, and they'll get cut, and they'll get traded for some bullshit second-round pick at some point. But I like both of these guys, and that is so hard to say about guys that are on the Clippers. And I still will probably draft them on the hope that Doc leaves, or that they get moved on somewhere else and they can start to thrive. But I do really like these selections from the Clippers. And again, that's a pretty weird thing for me to say given the way that they have drafted. Let's move on to the Los Angeles Lakers. we'll start, of course, with Lonzo Ball at pick 2. That was always going to happen. A 6'6" point guard out of UCLA, going to be the number 2 rookie off the board in dynasty drafts, in regular drafts. He should be a top 100 player this season. Normally, you get about 2 top 100 rookies each season. This year, I reckon you might get 3 or 4. I think you'll get Fultz, I think you'll get Ball, I think you'll get Smith, and I think you got a chance to maybe get Fox, maybe. His efficiency could keep him out the top 100. But I'm pretty sure that Ball will be a top 100 guy. The problem we're going to have with Lonzo, the minutes will be fine, but as such a low usage player out of college, that's just not something you expect out of these star players. The assist will be fine. He can block some shots. He can get some steals, but do not expect for him to be a 70% 2-point shooter, which is what he was in college. That won't be the case. He won't be able to shoot as efficiently as what he did. He's not a guy that's excellent at getting to the rim. The shot could get blocked a little bit more in the NBA, so there are definite concerns with his scoring and his efficiency. But he's big. And I've been getting into a lot of arguments with Lakers people telling me, telling him how much I don't like that trade, and them telling me how awesome it is because it opens up cap space for Paul George and LeBron to come across. And now we give the keys to Lonzo and he can run everything. And I just say, look, cool, he's a rookie point guard. Your last rookie point guard you had who was picked in the last spot, you all of a sudden think that he's terrible now. And you're not necessarily getting Paul George and LeBron, so just calm down. But the concern there with Lonzo is how does the shot go? How does it translate into the NBA against bigger, faster, stronger athletes? The court vision will be fine. He'll push the pace. He's going to be awesome to watch, like super fun to watch. Love him. And I think he's going to be a really good fantasy player, but he does have a degree of bust potential just with the fantasy numbers, with his scoring, with his field goal percentage. He was a piss poor free throw shooter as well, so that is a concern. But I think that he can be a top 100 guy, and he would be my number 2 guy off the board in dynasty leagues. The other selections the Lakers made, they had picked 27, which is what they got in exchange for D'Angelo Russell. They selected Kyle Kuzma, the forward out of Utah, 6'9", 22 years of age. Pretty decent rebounder. His defense is a concern. He can hit the 3. His fantasy numbers don't translate well, and he's going to be behind Julius Randle and Larry Nance Jr. in that situation. But yeah, the rebounding can be strong for him. Not bad efficiency, some threes. There's some okay things there for Kuzma, but there are guys picked in that second round, Jawan Evans, that I would rather take ahead of him. Jordan Bell, Isaiah Hardenstein. I would take all of those guys ahead of Kyle Kuzma if I'm doing a dynasty rookie draft. Where are we? Pick 42 for the Lakers, and they had pick 28 as well. They made a few trades, the Lakers. They had pick 28, and they traded that to Utah for pick 30 and pick 42. And then at pick 30, they selected Josh Hart out of Villanova. I love that pick. There is a big opportunity for Josh Hart. Now, originally, the Lakers had they're going to have Russell and Ball as their backcourt. With Nick Young opting out, maybe he returns. Jordan Clarkson, his future's uncertain. Hart's a guy that I think will be a contributor almost immediately, and he projects very well from a fantasy point of view as well. So that pick at pick 30, I'd take him ahead of Kyle Kuzma in rookie drafts. Even though he's a little bit older, I think he can project very, very well to an NBA level and to a fantasy level as well. So I really do like this pick for the Lakers. Threes, really good rebounder, can get some assists, nice steals. I think will play off Lonzo decently well. Also, pretty good efficiency numbers from the field and from the line. I think it's a very, very good pick for Josh Hart there for the Lakers at pick 30. And then pick 42, the other selection they got from Utah, Thomas Bryant, a guy who's got a pretty poor rebounding rate and defensive stuff's not great, but I don't mind that pick either. I think that he has got an opportunity to be a top 100 player at some point in the future, potentially. Now, on the Lakers, you've got Brook Lopez and Ivica Zubats there at this point, but anything can change, and he could become a backup center. I'd say probably next season would be the earliest when Lopez is gone, and maybe he moves into that role there. But for now, he's got Tariq Black, Zubats, and Lopez ahead of him, so there is a fair degree of movement needed for him to get into that role. Probably play a lot of the time at the Defenders, which I don't believe they're called the Los Angeles Defenders anymore, which is the worst name in any sort of sport anywhere. They I don't think he's there, but his numbers aren't awesome for fantasy. The low rebounding numbers for a center and your not awesome block numbers are somewhat of a concern, but it's a pretty solid pick there. Memphis. got themselves into the draft and at the expense of some Orlando idiocy, which again, this Orlando pick, I didn't hate it. What they did with Philadelphia, I hated more. The Magic sent pick 35 to the Grizzlies in exchange for Brooklyn's 2019 second rounder. With this pick, Memphis selected California's center Ivan Rabb, a guy that was projected to be a lottery selection last season and really disappointed in his college year this year and dropped right down the board. So maybe they get themselves a little bit of a steal in getting some backup for when Zach Randolph goes, when Marcus Gasol goes at some point. He averaged 14 and 10.5 this year at 6'10". How does his fantasy value look? It's not something that I'm overly interested in. The rebounding rate is really nice, but his lack of block numbers and rim protection is a concern, as well as his poor efficiency, which can definitely improve, but I don't see him coming in and being this awesome guy or have any projections for him to be the starting center of the future. I much prefer a guy like Deontay Davis for Memphis, who they drafted in a very similar spot last season. That's the Memphis pick that they had. Well, that's the only pick that Memphis had. Let's move on to the Miami Heat, who only had one selection in the draft, and that was pick 14. And I think that was probably the biggest shock of the draft, selecting Bam Adebayo at pick 14, the 6'10" center, 20 years of age, out of Kentucky. That is not the direction I would have gone. I would have chosen a guy like a John Collins in that spot. Bam is fine. From our point of view, looking at fantasy, I don't love it from him at all. I just don't really see what he's offering. He's coming in, going to be the backup behind Whiteside. That probably means the end of Willie Reed. So deeper leagues, he's going to have an impact pretty much immediately, I would think, as he comes in and maybe plays 16 minutes a game straight away. And I don't doubt what Riley and Spoelstra can do. They can definitely develop him into a player, but none of his initial translations look good. His stretchability is not there, although he maintains that he can hit threes. I'll believe that when I see it. And he's not going to be an offensive scoring threat. Although his ability on pick and rolls is something interesting, lobs, alley-oops, that sort of stuff. I think he's got some ability there, but nothing totally stands out for me. At pick 14, I would much rather take a bloke like John Collins in a fantasy draft at 19, ahead of Bam, who was picked 5 spots ahead of him at pick 14. Definitely not the selection that I would have gone with there for the Miami Heat. Let's move on to the Milwaukee Bucks. DJ Wilson, pick 17, out of Michigan, a 6'10", 21-year-old forward who shot 37% from 3 last season, put up some pretty good block numbers. He's a poor rebounder. He doesn't get to the line all that much. Nothing about him screams awesome, but his fantasy value is ahead of guys like an Ike Anabogu, probably, like a Tyler, Tyler Lydon's fantasy value is not terrible, but look, his fantasy value projects higher than, say, a guy like a Jarrett Allen. With Milwaukee, we know Jabari Parker's out to start the season, but I don't think that means that DJ is going to move straight into that starting role. But yeah, we've got, I can't think of now, Mirza Teletovic, Mick Beasley are there at the 4 at the moment, who aren't great options, especially for the future with Teletovic, especially being a lot older than what you expect. The good block numbers, the good 3 numbers are interesting. The efficiency should be pretty good from DJ Wilson as well. So all in all, it's a pretty solid pick. It definitely doesn't stand out as being an awesome fantasy option, but he should be a guy that goes in the top 25 of rookie dynasty drafts and's got a little bit of upside. But again, with Jabari being that guy moving forward, Wilson does have somewhat of a cap on his early value despite Parker's ACL injury that's going to keep him out for the start of the season. Let's move on to the next selection. As I said, the Bucks sold on one of their picks to the Los Angeles Clippers. The Minnesota Timberwolves. Obviously, they got Jimmy Butler, and that's a fantastic coup for them to be able to get Butler in that position. I think Butler's going to be fine. I talked about that already. Rubio's job is safe unless a trade comes up or unless Thibodeau does something absolutely ridiculous and gets Derrick Rose, which is a possibility. But at this point, Rubio's pretty safe. Tyus Jones moves into that backup role, and they somehow managed to get pick 16 back off the Bulls. I cannot believe that was the case. And with that selection, they chose Justin Patton, the 7-foot center out of Creighton. He's a relatively poor rebounder with some free throw issues. He is a decent rim protector, though, so that can have some value in fantasy, but obviously we know who the center of the future is in Minnesota, and his name is Karl Anthony Towns. The backup center should be Gorgie Jeng. There's Cole Aldrich there, there's Jordan Hill. I don't think those guys are going to have too much of an impact, but Patton's a guy that we want to wait on. We want to wait a little bit of time to see what he can come up with. Fantasy-wise, with his high efficiency rim running ability, he can be up there as a fantasy rank guy, but I think that you don't want to get too excited about him. But if you picked him at pick 16 in a fantasy draft, I don't think that would be a horrendous decision. But again, the league is going away from 7-footers who can't really stretch it out, so that does give me pause for concern with Patton's future in the NBA and whether he can ever even approach 30 minutes a game. I think I'd be pretty stunned if he could ever get to that level. The New Orleans Pelicans, let's talk about them. They didn't have a pick, and they got that pick off the Wizards in exchange for Timmy Frazier, then ended up trading up to get themselves a pick from the Hornets, pick 31, and they chose Frank Jackson out of Duke, which is a selection that I really like for them. Obviously, they have the what's going to happen with Drew Holiday situation. That's a concern for them. Jackson's a little bit of a gamble. His fantasy translations look horrendous, look absolutely disgusting. But I wouldn't be putting that much faith, or not that much faith, but I wouldn't be looking at it and going, well, he's a definite write-off. I think that he's a guy that you'd pick a little bit higher than 31 just for a bit of a hope to see if he can develop into something. But at this point, the translations didn't look awesome for him, but I still like the pick for New Orleans at that position to get him at pick 31 when your team desperately needs point guard depth. I think that's the way to go, and he could easily find himself in the backup point guard role almost immediately, depending on how things go in free agency for this team. But it's a decent pick. He's got I guess an okay amount of value. All right, voice is going a bit dry. Let's move on to everybody's favorite team, the New York Knickerbockers, who didn't trade Kristaps Porzingis. So I guess we can leave that as a win for them. And at pick 8, they didn't screw that up either. Frank Ntilikina at pick 8, a 6'5" point guard out of France. He is still yet to turn 19 years of age. Yes, Dennis Smith was still on the board, but the Frank pick is not bad. Again, people have a real bias against European guys. Oh, we haven't seen him. We don't know how he's going to turn out. Oh, it's a bad pick. That is a default reaction from a lot of people. I'm sure it's not from you guys listening, but it is a default reaction from some people. Now, Frank's numbers, they don't translate well from Strasbourg. And a lot of the international guys do. His ones don't. But I think that there's a chance that he is the starting point guard at some point in his rookie season. And I'd have no problem if you had picking him at pick 8 in a fantasy rookie draft. I think there is a lot to like about Ntilikina. Shot the ball well, looked really in charge at the FIBA under-18s or under-19 tournament earlier in the year when he was playing more as a point guard. Really long wingspan, like 6'10", 6'11" wingspan. You can get some steals, hit some threes, do that efficiently. You get himself some assists. He's never going to be an 8-assist game guy, but plenty of point guards aren't. They can be 6.5 assist guys, like a Dame Lillard, like a Jeff Teague, those sort of players. Frank's got a real chance to be the top 200 guy, I think, in his rookie season. I think expecting him to crack the top 100 is going to be a little bit of a stretch, but I like what he can bring, especially defensively. If he can get his steal rate up, which isn't always the case, and it wasn't very high over in France, but if he can get his steal rate up, up to, say, 1.6, 1.7 a game, which could be a possibility. Again, we're nowhere near that at the moment, so a little bit of a way to go. And hit some threes, and then start to get 4 assists, 4.5 assists a game in his rookie season, and start to build it up. He's a guy that I like for a couple of years down the track. Their other two selections, pick 44, Damian Dotson, the 6'5" guard out of Houston, 23 years of age. He was a 44% three-point shooter, really decent defender, good shot. He just gets points. He just gets buckets. He shoots. He makes shots. That's what he does. And then the Knicks can always, or anyone can always do with anyone like that. I don't think that he is going to be any sort of starter or anything along those lines, but his fantasy projections are awesome. His efficiency looks awesome. The ability to hit threes, grab rebounds, and score makes him interesting, and I'd probably take him a little bit higher than the pick 44 than he actually went at. So I do like Damian Dotson there. Kevin Lappin says, give us a very rough top 15 for Dynasty. Well, off the top of my head, I don't. My top 4 is Fultz, Ball, Smith. They're my top 3, and I would probably take Isaac next. I'd go Tatum, Fox after that. Probably Ntilikina, Zach Collins. Then then you go into like Markkanen and Monk, those sort of players. I might even have Johnny Collins ahead of those guys. That's sort of how I'd be looking at it at this point. Pick 58, Onjin Jaramaz, the 22-year-old Serbian point guard for the Knicks. He was a 36% three-point shooter last season for Megalex, 3.7 assists per 30 minutes. He's not going to come over. He'll be an overseas stash guy, so I don't think there's any real need to get too excited about Jaramaz. Yet nothing's totally exciting, and it's a fine pick to use at pick 58 and see if anything develops. He's got a long way to go, but that's totally fine with the third last pick in the draft. Pick 21, the Oklahoma City Thunder. They selected Terrence Ferguson out of the Adelaide 36ers, a 6'7" small forward, 19 years of age, athletic, a guy that can shoot. Struggled a bit in Australia, but I think this is exactly what the Thunder need. Someone to play on the wing that can develop into a reliable three-point shooter. Not what Jeremy Grant is, not what Andre Robertson is. Yes, Alex Abrines and Dougie McDirt are there, but this is someone who is athletic. McDirt is not. Abrines is sort of athletic, but this is a guy that's got a huge amount of potential to grow, and at that spot, I really do enjoy that for the Thunder. His translations are really hard to get a handle on, given that not many people come straight out of the Australian League. I don't think there's any chance that he is a top 150 player in his rookie season, but I wouldn't have any problem if you took him a little bit higher than pick 21, ahead of a guy like, I say, Bam Adebayo. I wouldn't have any problem with taking Ferguson higher than that in a dynasty rookie setting. I love the pick for Oklahoma City, getting Ferguson there. The Orlando Magic. Let's talk about them, because they had pick 6 and they made some of the strangest moves in this draft. Pick 6, John Isaac. I love it. I love John Isaac. Now, it doesn't necessarily fit them the best because they've got Aaron Gordon in that position, but I don't care. They just need whatever talent they can get. I would have chosen Dennis Smith for them because, again, I believe he is a better talent, but I think Isaac can be very, very good. Isaac can play center. If the league continues to sort of downsize things, I wouldn't be surprised to see Gordon as your 4 and Isaac as your 5. No problem with that whatsoever. I also wouldn't be surprised to see Aaron Gordon moved on at some point. The presence of Nikola Vucevic and Bismack Biyombo shouldn't be any worry to me to having Isaac there. He is going to be raw, but he'd be a top 5 dynasty pick to me, not a problem. Probably, again, the guy I'd take at number 4. If you want immediate impact, it's probably going to be Fox. But Isaac is a 1-1 guy, good blocks, very good rebounds, good steals, can hit some threes, can become a scorer, and can get a lot stronger. And I really do like this pick. Some people think it's stupid for Orlando to select him. I've got no issue with it. I think it is a strong, strong pick, and we'll see how it develops as we move forward. Really, really do like this pick of Jonathan Isaac, and you should be considering him at 4, I reckon, in dynasty rookie drafts. The Orlando Magic also had pick 25, which they got from the Raptors in the Serge Ibaka trade, but they decided in all their wisdom to send it to the Philadelphia 76ers for the Oklahoma City Thunder's first-round pick in 2020, which is top 20 protected, and if it doesn't convert, it turns into 2 second-rounders. And they also got a 2020 second rounder, which is the best of, I think, Brooklyn's and Memphis's. I think I could be wrong on that, but they get a 2020 second rounder. No idea what they're doing. This is a team that has very little talent. Get your talent in. Don't defer it for 3 more years. What is the point of that? There are plenty of players who went well after that selection that I would have taken there. Jordan Bell, Jonah Bolden. Any of those wing guys. Should I would have taken a guy like Dwayne Bacon there? Like, just someone who can, maybe not Bacon. But you're trading it away for an asset 3 years in the future, which is probably not going to be a good one, is just very weird. It is weird. Now I'm going to have a look just at who did come after that pick. Pick 25. Derek White. I would have taken Derek White in that spot. Josh Hart, Frank Jackson. Wesley Awundu, who they got at 33, I would have been okay taking him at that spot. As I said, Bolden, Bell, Jawan Evans, Hartenstein. Shit, I would have taken him at that spot. I don't care who you just picked. It is a weird decision to trade that away, in my opinion, for the Orlando Magic to trade that pick away. With pick 33, or they traded pick 35 away as well to Memphis for a 2019 second rounder. Again, why? No idea what they're doing. Pick 33, I love it. Wesley Awundu, the 6'7 senior, really had been rocketing up draft boards recently. I like this pick. You want wings who can provide defense. He can handle the ball. He's a decent rebounder, can score. Really good 7'1" wingspan. I love this pick for Awundu. Now, fantasy-wise, I'm not sure how much of a contributor he can be, but I think he can be solid, and I think he could be better than the 33 pick in terms of overall fantasy value. But heading to Orlando, who knows what that means? They don't have a great deal of wing depth. Yes, there's Fournier there, but he's going to play the 2. There's Terrence Ross at the 3. Then there's just a bunch of shit behind that. There's not much there to really get too excited about. So Awundu, while he probably won't play a big role immediately, I like the pick as a legit 3-and-D tertiary ball handler type of wing. I think that's super valuable, and I really do like that selection from the Orlando Magic. So they had some good picks. Isaac and Awundu, I like. The trade of 25 was just ridiculous. It didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Let's move on now to the Philadelphia 76ers, where a lot of shit went down, clearly. Pick 1, they acquired, and they selected Markelle Fultz there, the 6'4 point guard out of Washington. We know all about Fultz. I don't need to spend a huge amount of time on him. He should be the number 1 rookie off the board in all dynasty drafts. He should be the number 1 rookie off the draft in all standard league drafts, and you should definitely look to avoid him in standard league drafts because he will go too early. Someone will go into the 50s for him. Someone will go inside the top 50 for him, and yes, while there is a chance he can be in the top 50, there's a decent chance. I'm not really ready to do that because all odds tell me that it probably won't be. Especially with a lack of free throw shooting, not a super high assist number, and not going to be a necessarily volume scorer immediately, and sharing some ball handling duties with Ben Simmons. I would still most definitely take him number 1 in Dynasty. In redraft, I might take Lonzo ahead of him. His numbers translate pretty well. Okay steals, okay threes, good scoring, decent assists. But it's the efficiency which is going to be a little bit of a concern. Nice blocking of shots. But I almost will be I'm convinced he's going to be drafted too early in your redrafts. But for Dynasty, he is my number 1. Pick 25, they acquired off the Orlando Magic, as I mentioned, and they selected Anges Pasechniks, the 7'2 center out of Gran Canaria and Latvia. He's 21 years of age. Yes, he's from Latvia. Yes, he is tall. Yes, he is white. No, he is not Porzingis. He is not a stretch 5. He is not a long-range 3-point bomber. He was super efficient, very, very efficient, because he takes nearly all of his shots next to the rim, and that's totally fine. And, you know, I like the pick. They're going to stash him overseas most likely and have him there as an option to be a backup to Joel Embiid at some point, depending on what happens with Okafor and Richaun Holmes. He's not going to play much this season. Well, he's not going to come over much at all this season, but he's a good option. He can block shots. He can, like I said, he's super efficient, and that can work for fantasy. He can be a guy that does work. Rebounding, definitely not his strong suit, but shot blocking, some scoring, and super efficiency is something that Pasechniks can do. Just don't expect it from him immediately. Pick 36, you know I love this one. Jonah Bolden. Not only does he reunite with fellow Aussie Ben Simmons and pseudo-Aussie Brett Brown, but it's a great situation for him to find himself in. Does Dario Saric get himself moved at some point? There is a chance of that. Bolden has a real opportunity here to be a guy that develops himself into a starter, whether it's on this team, probably not, but on another team, he could really get himself some superb value, and I think you've got to love him for fantasy as well. The numbers that he came across from Europe were with sensational 111 type numbers, good scoring, really good rebounding, hit the 3 pretty well. The efficiency stuff needs some work. One of those guys that I would definitely be taking ahead of, say, pick 36, well ahead of Pasechniks. I'd be looking at him, so I do like that selection for him. At pick 46, they got Sterling Brown. I like Sterling Brown, a wing, and you can never really have too many wings. A guy that can be a secondary ball handler for portions of time. He's 22 years of age. He's 6'6". I like the selection of Sterling Brown, another guy with really good fantasy translations. Threes, assists, rebounds, steals. Really like his numbers. We know that Gerald Henderson's there for the moment. Whether he remains is yet to be seen. There is Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot on the wing, Bob Cove, but Sterling Brown in a couple of years' time could easily develop into a 7th or 8th man at the wing position and be a top 200 fantasy talent, maybe a top 150 guy. Not that I ever think he develops into a starter, but there is a fair degree to like about Sterling Brown and that selection for the Philadelphia 76ers. At pick 50, I love this one as well. Matthias Lesor, the French center, really like this selection, and he also has ridiculously good fantasy translation. Super high rebounding, good block numbers, solid efficiency, not going to stretch the floor, not going to be an offensive threat, but really good rebounding type numbers, good steals, good blocks, good field goal percentage. Probably not going to come over either, but another really nice lottery pick, late guy that I would take ahead of pick 50, no doubt in my mind. And again, it gives them some Embiid insurance, what to do with Holmes and what to do with Okafor in that position also, and gives them a couple of guys to sit over there in Pasechniks and Lesor and see how those guys work out and see how it develops and potentially bring them over. But I do really like Matthias Lesor at that pick there for the Philadelphia 76ers. Phoenix Suns, they had pick 4 in the draft and they selected Josh Jackson at 6'8", small forward out of Kansas. I can't tell you how out I am on Josh Jackson. I'm just not a fan of his. I don't see superstar potential. That is not the selection I would have made for the Suns. I think a lot of Suns fans will be happy, and they definitely have an opening there in that spot. What that means for TJ Warren, I'm not sure, but I don't see superstar, at least superstar fantasy potential from Josh Jackson. As I said, I wouldn't be taking him at pick 4 in any dynasty type draft. That would go to Isaac, in my opinion. I'd probably take Jackson around 6 or 7, probably 7 after Fox, who would go in that zone, and the other guy who I am currently forgetting, Tatum. I just don't really see him translating into big numbers. The free throw percentage is piss poor. The threes, I think there might have been a level of fluke with those last year. He's not going to be an elite type scorer, and I think some of his secondary ball handling ability was maybe a little bit overvalued or overinflated. So there is a concern now. I do like a couple of things. I do like the assist numbers. They're good. I do like the steal numbers for Jackson, and his defense is fine. I just don't think he projects to be as much of a star as what some people were. And I said, I've been out on him for quite a while. As I've mentioned, I still think that he is going to be a guy that you take him in the top 7 of dynasty ranks. I don't think he's going to be a standard league player next year, though, even if he got 30 minutes a game, which is a bit of a stretch with TJ Warren, Bender, Chris all playing in that sort of a zone, unless they move Chris or Bender to center full time and get rid of Williams and Len or Chandler or whatever, open up some minutes there and start to play Jackson or Warren at the 4 and some smaller lineups, which is a possibility, although I think both of those guys are perfectly suited to the 3. I'm just not sure what Jackson becomes, and I don't have massive levels of hope for him from a fantasy star point of view. The Phoenix Suns, what other pick did they also have? That's a good question. They had where's my list? They had pick 54, and they picked Alec Peters with that pick. But do they have I thought they had an earlier one that as well. Yes, they did. Pick 32. They had Caleb Swannick. Is that right? What's wrong with my list here? Is this list? No, this list is wrong. I'm looking at the wrong list. Sorry. Let's go. They picked 32. Sorry. They had Devon Reed out of Miami, which is a pick that I did not like. And I can say I didn't like the Josh Jackson one. I didn't like Devon Reed here at this pick. I reckon they could have got him at pick 54. Jonah Bolden was still sitting on the board there. Jawan Evans was still sitting on the board. Don't like this Reed pick, but getting a guy that's a wing is decent. Steal numbers all right. 3's okay. I definitely wouldn't be putting much faith in Devon Reed as a player who I look for fantasy or as a 22-year-old for the Suns to have too much of an impact for them as we move forward. Their other selection was Alec Peters, as I mentioned, pick 54, the power forward at Valparaiso, 6'9", 22 years of age for Peters. Yeah, the numbers project for him pretty decently. Nice rebound numbers, good scoring, okay points, steals not bad, but I just don't really see him with Bender, with Chris, with Jackson, with Warren, all those guys there that playing in that front court. Peters' path to minutes is obviously pretty limited, and he'd be a guy that I'd let fall pretty far down. Just not a lot of excitement for a guy like Alec Peters in my mind. Let's move on to Portland, who are pretty active in this draft with trades. They moved their pick 15 and pick 20 to the Sacramento Kings to move up to pick 10, and in the process they passed on Malik Monk and they selected Zach Collins, who is a really awesome pick. I love this pick for Collins. I think that he is going to be an interesting player. Yusuf Nurkic is there in Portland, but don't be surprised if Collins ends up being a better player at some point. Now, he can play a little bit at the 4 as well and play at the 5, and we know they've got some issues at the 4 with Harkless manning that spot at sometimes, Aminu at sometimes, and both having their moments. Their Myers, Leonard, Ed Davis bullshit backup center struggled, and just because Zach Collins is white, he is not Myers Leonard. Get that out of your head immediately. He is not Myers Leonard at all. But fantasy translations, Zach Collins, through the roof. Block numbers, field goal percentage, good free throws, good steals, rebounds, hit threes, scores. He should be getting inside the top 10. I would take him ahead of Monk. I would even challenge to take him ahead of Ntilikina. I would challenge to take him ahead of Josh Jackson even. I would potentially go down that route to take him ahead of Josh Jackson. I would be okay taking him inside the top 10 in fantasy drafts. The potential is there. Don't look at Nurkic and think that that is a total roadblock. Nurkic just has injury problems. He's had attitudinal issues. Maybe the Blazers don't want to pay up when his restricted free agency comes up at the end of this season. Maybe they don't want to pay up for that. Collins is a perfect guy to back up, and even if he plays 24, 25 minutes a night, he could challenge the top 150 in that limited playing time, especially the second half of the season. You should be valuing Zach Collins fairly highly. Probably the only big who comes into this draft as a starting caliber guy. Now, Justin Allen's probably going to have the chance to do that in Brooklyn. Doesn't necessarily mean he'd be good at it, but Collins is the guy that wherever he went, you know what, this guy's got a role and got an ability to challenge for a starting spot. So I do like that pick. At pick 26, they selected Caleb Swanigan, the 6'9" center out of Purdue, another big man. Again, the Nurkic situation, Davis, Leonard, all these guys, like what are they going to do bring these players in? Now, Swanigan was an offensive beast. He lost a lot of weight and can be a guy that can get out there and hit some shots for you. 18.5 points, 12.5 rebounds last season for Swanigan. He projects well for fantasy, but don't expect defense. You're not going to get defensive numbers out of him. Rebounds, points, some threes, and really good efficiency. That makes him a guy that at that pick, at pick 26, where he went, real chance to go ahead of that. Like I'd have him ahead of guys like Pashekniks who went ahead of him. Probably ahead of a guy like TJ Leaf and DJ Wilson, even for fantasy value. Maybe even consider probably not a Justin Patton, but there is a possibility that he turns out a better player than Justin Patton in the end. Let's move on to the next selection, or the next team in the draft, and that is the Sacramento Kings. Loved what they did in the draft, even though some of the selections they made, they're not the selections I would have made in that position, but I love what they did. They moved pick 10 to get pick 15 and pick 20. At pick 5, they selected De'Aaron Fox, the point guard out of Kentucky, 6'4". I would have taken Dennis Smith, but this Fox pick for them was written all over the board immediately. He is going to play minutes straight away. They don't have a point guard there, but the efficiency concerns, the ability that he's not a great driver, and he's not an awesome assist guy. Don't, to me, he is going to be overdrafted in redraft leagues. He will go, he might go inside the top 75, and I reckon it's going to be too high. The efficiency, the no threes, the lack of scoring, the numbers where he's all right at steals, but not superb. He doesn't project well at all. I would much rather have Dennis Smith over him. So in that dynasty draft, when Fox went ahead of Smith, I was wrapped with that. I think that Smith can be a better on-court player and a better fantasy option. He's very light. Defense could be a concern. But there's also nobody to take the minutes away from him at this point. Now, whether they bring Collison back as a reserve or they start Collison and play Fox limited minutes earlier on, that is a possibility. But he is the number one candidate to me to be overdrafted in standard leagues. As much as I think Fultz will be, I reckon Fox is going to start going 60s, 70s even. I think you'll see Fox go ahead of guys like Jeremy Lin, who I would much rather have ahead of De'Aaron, even though D'Angelo Russell is now in Brooklyn. So he's going to be interesting, but the shooting is the concern. Now, if you can start to bring that on, then shit, let's go. Let's bring some numbers on, and that means you want to take that risk ahead of him. I'd take him ahead of Josh Jackson, Larry Markkinen in my dynasty rankings, no problem. Malik Monk, all those guys, clearly ahead of those players, but I think there is a risk that he gets a little bit overdrafted in standard leagues when we head to that in September and October. Their next selection, as they moved down to pick 15, they got Justin Jackson. He is a 6'8" small forward, 22-year-old, who improved his three-point shooting in his junior year after being a pretty poor shooter in the first couple of years. Not a great athlete, but we know the Kings have a real need for small forwards because they legitimately have none on the roster. So there is a chance that they go into the season with Justin Jackson as a starting small forward. Now, they'd be looking to bring someone across in free agency, and they probably wouldn't do that, but Jackson has the ability and has the potential, I guess is maybe the way of saying it, to be their starting small forward at some point during the season. Again, does that mean that he is going to be a great fantasy option? Probably not. I'm not sure how his shooting is going to translate. What else does he do? He doesn't protect the rim. He doesn't get steals. He doesn't pass. He doesn't rebound well. He can hit some threes. And I think he'd more be a streamer even if he found himself in a 30-minute a night type of role. So I'm not super interested in Josh Jackson. I'm not interested in Josh. I'm not interested in Justin Jackson all that much in that at that situation either, but it is still a good pick. At pick 20, after two selections already in the first round, the Sacramento Kings took a flyer on Harry Giles, and I love it. He was a guy who was the number 1 prospect or number 2 prospect along with Dennis Smith before they both tore their ACL, and then he tore it a second time and had multiple knee issues and looked tentative at Duke. He's 6'11", he's 19 years of age. Fine. Take him in. See what you got. See what you can bring. I love the pick. I love bringing him in and seeing what he can give you. Seeing what his knee is like as your third first rounder, you're playing with pretty much house money at that point, and there's the potential for him to be special. Steals and blocks could be good, could be a good rebounder. He just needs to become more of an offensive threat, which again, how much of that is to do with the knees and how much of that is recoverable? Can he get the offensive bounce back, or is it gone forever? There's a real chance that it's gone forever, which would not be good. But I love the selection here of Giles, and dynasty fantasy-wise, I think there's a little bit of there's a huge amount of upside. There's obviously risk associated, but I do like the selection. At pick 34, they brought in another point guard. They don't have any on the roster. Collison, Lawson, Tyreke Evans, all these guys are free agents. They bring in Frank Mason, the 23-year-old senior out of Kansas. He's only a small guy, only 5'11", but I guess brings just another body to that position who can be an interesting guy, get some assists, shoot free throws, shoot threes, get some steals, and be interesting. Now, he's not going to move into the starting role, but there's a real chance that the Kings could be running him and Fox as their 1-2 point guards next season. It's not a high chance, but there is a distinct chance that is the case. At some point next season, that will be their point guard depth chart. And that would make Mason a contender to be a top 250 player. So I like the pick for him at pick 34. I'm not sure how high his actual upside is. So when we're talking dynasty leagues and drafting for upside, I'm not sure that Mason really fits the bill there necessarily. But I like the selection for them nonetheless. And not often you say that about the Kings' moves, but really can't fault much of what they did. San Antonio is the next selection. They didn't make any moves. LaMarcus Aldridge wasn't on the move. Nothing happened spectacularly. They had pick 29 and pick 59, and I love what they did at pick 29. That's pretty much always the case with the Spurs. Derek White, the guard out of Colorado, a 6'5" guard. You have to love that. Yes, he's 23 years of age. He averaged 18.5, 4 and 4.5 last season for Colorado, and also another guy that projects exceptionally well for fantasy with his steal rate, his extraordinarily high block rate, field goal and free throw efficiency, hits some threes, scores, rebounds. I really like what he's in this situation. Now, we don't know if Tone Parker is January is when we're thinking he is back. Is Pat Mills back? What do we think of DeJounte Murray? Does White come in and challenge him? Remember, Murray was picked in a similar spot last year. So White is a guy that, again, I think should go higher than pick 29 in a dynasty draft. There is a distinct possibility of him working his way into a starting point guard role, whether it's this team or another. Now, things can obviously change in free agency with Chris Paul, Drew Holiday, Georgie Hill, any of those sort of guys that could come across to San Antonio. But I absolutely love this pick. It looks great for fantasy. He could find himself on another team. I think you should be looking at Derek White and being pretty excited for what he can bring from a fantasy point of view from that late of a selection. At pick 59, they selected Jaron Blossom game out of Clemson. I don't know what there is to really enjoy about him as a fantasy prospect. Nothing there stands out. He's like a half 111 type of guy with a little bit of production. Scoring not bad, coming off some leg injuries. I wouldn't be getting overly excited there, but it's pick 59. Like, what do you expect? I don't think you expect to get overly excited in that situation. Let's move on now to the Toronto Raptors. They had one selection, pick 23, and I think they'd be absolutely rapt that OG Anunoby fell to them. Now, Anunoby's probably going to miss most of the year with an ACL injury, but I don't think they're expecting him to be a challenger or to be a contributor right away. Yes, Damari Carroll's terrible. We know that. Maybe PJ Tucker doesn't return to this team. And that's the role that OG fills moving forward. He's got the upside to be the best perimeter defender in this entire draft class. Offense is a concern. Yes, the ACL is a problem, but he's only done it once. It's not a multiple Harry Giles type situation. He's 6'8", 20 years of age. I think you have to love this for the Raptors to get Anunoby at this point. From a fantasy point of view, he's not going to be an offensive guy, but think of a player who provides steals and blocks. That's the guy that gives it to you, doesn't shoot much, so the field goal percentage will be fine, but it won't be high volume. Free throws are a worry. Threes, maybe he can start hitting some of those, but it's going to be rebounds, steals, and blocks that Anunoby brings you. And I wouldn't have any problem with drafting some of the guys that came after him, ahead of him in a dynasty type situation. So players after him like Derek White, like Josh Hart. I wouldn't have much problem grabbing those guys. A Bolden, a Bell, those sort of players who could have more impact. But I still like that selection of Anunoby, who does have star defensive potential for this team. So I do like that selection from the Toronto Raptors. 2 teams to go, and the one of those we're going to talk about now is the Utah Jazz, who made a couple of trades, sending out Trey Lyles and pick 24 and getting pick 13 back in return, and it's Donovan Mitchell, and I love it. 6'3" shooting guard / point guard, 21 years of age, who loves Utah, but this signifies a few things. Alec Burks is cooked. George Hill might not be back, and I'm not sure what that means for Gordon Hayward and Dante Exum's future, or Joe Ingles for that matter. It gives them some definite ammunition or insurance. And I think at least one of Hill, Ingles, and Hayward are gone. Maybe 2. But I'd say almost Hill is definitely gone. Give Exum the run and let Mitchell try and work into that role as well. From a fantasy point of view, you should be pretty interested in Donovan Mitchell. He puts up some good numbers, very high steal rate, super hard worker, great kid, can hit some threes. Yeah, I think he can work on the assist and maybe become a 4.5 assist type of guy, maybe like a George Hill guy even. That's the sort of player that he can become, without maybe the offensive portion of the game. The efficiency is something that will need to be worked on. That will stink initially, but I love that selection at pick 13 of Donovan Mitchell for the Utah Jazz. They also got pick 28 off the Lakers, where they sent pick 30 and pick 42 to the Lakers to move up 2 spots to get Tony Bradley. Not sure the 100% urgency to get Tony Bradley there, where you just have to move up 2 spots to get him. That seemed a little bit strange to me. Nothing is overly exciting about Tony Bradley from a real life or fantasy point of view, so I definitely don't value him that highly, and I'd have plenty of second round guys ahead of him at that spot. And at pick 55, Nigel Williams-Goss, who is another player who translates very, very nicely for fantasy. With Shelvin Mack potentially not being around, George Hill, Hull Neto, the point guard situation is far from settled. Williams-Goss is a player who could find himself in a third point guard type of role and be that player like Mack that when the opportunity arose, he can put up some numbers. I do like his upside ability, and I like him at pick 55, and I think it's a decent spot for the Jazz to get him. So I say well done to that. Well done to Donovan Mitchell. Not sure about giving up on Trey Lyles, and not sure about the Tony Bradley selection. The last team was the Washington Wizards, and they didn't make a pick. And that's it. That is the NBA draft. Now, while I'm recording this, there's probably news coming out of undrafted free agency. Weirdly, Jonathan Motley did not get selected by any team. Cameron Oliver did not get selected, and Devin Robinson did not get selected. Now, I've seen a couple of reports, one saying that Cameron Oliver went to Minnesota, and one saying that Cameron Oliver went to Houston. So I'm not sure which one of those is accurate. That's Cameron Oliver out of Nevada. I'm going to have a look to see exactly what I can find about Cameron Oliver to make sense. Oh yeah, Woj is reporting that he has gone to the Houston Rockets. So that's an interesting spot there for Oliver to head to Houston again. Ryan Anderson, old, not that good, potentially on the move. I think it's an interesting spot for Oliver to arrive. I haven't heard anything on Motley yet at this point. There's a few other guys. Andrew White's another guy that I think people should be looking at, but Oliver's a guy that projects very well for fantasy, so I wouldn't have no problem in taking him inside the top 60 of a dynasty rookie draft, despite the fact that he was undrafted. So there is definitely a huge amount of upside for him with his steals, blocks, threes, rebounds, rebounding ability, and not bad scoring. So I think that's a pretty decent spot for him. In fact, I think him and Jake Wiley were the two highest undrafted players on my list here, and then the next one was Deontay Burton as another player who didn't get drafted. So they're out of my top 25 projected guys. They're the only three that didn't get drafted. So he is an interesting player to have a look at. We're done. My voice is cooked. I am pissed at the Bulls, obviously. Thank you, everyone who watched this live and listened to it later on. Tell your friends. Let me know if you've got any questions. Now, next week, I'm going to be easing things off. We're not going to go 5 days a week next week. I just don't know what I'm going to talk about for 5 days a week. But I am going to have a mailbag podcast. I'm going to put a tweet out across the weekend. Basketball-related, dynasty-related, fantasy-related, food-related, non-basketball-related. AFL footy related, whatever you want to talk about, I'm going to answer questions. I want to hopefully go 50-50, half basketball, half whatever, life questions, advice questions, whatever. Anything that you want to know, we'll talk about in that podcast. And we'll probably have one other one during the week when I've really had a chance to absorb a few other things. And we'll work on exactly what we're going to do with that second pod. And then I'm off to the States, so the pods will be a little bit more intermittent there. Summer league stuff, free agency pods will definitely come, but they won't come 5 days a week. Because you know what? I've got to have a bit of a holiday as well. And that's what I'm going to do while I'm over in the United States. Subscribe to this podcast so you do never miss an episode, especially now while it's not going to come every day for the next couple of weeks. And leave a review if you love it, if you like it, even if you don't, you heard this message, just leave a review. Tell everyone, hey, it's great, 5 stars, whatever. Just get the word out there. That would be awesome. And of course, make sure you are checking out Basketball Monster when we open our site up for subscriptions for next season, which will be at the end of August, start of September, with some new changes that we've got coming over on the site. Make sure you do check that out. I hope you guys enjoyed draft day. I hope you guys aren't Bull supporters, and I hope you get, in any transaction you make in life, I hope you get more than what the Chicago Bulls got out of the Jimmy Butler deal. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Donnie Nelson.